Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining another NOBEC talk. My name is Paulius. I am the Managing Director of the Center for Social Norms and Behavioral Dynamics here at Penn. And thank you again for joining another session. As always, the agenda will be very similar than in other talks. We will have a short welcome. Then we will see this week's NOBEC Early Career Researcher video, this time by Erika Kyrgios from Wharton School here at Penn as well. And then we will have the main talk by Chris Roth and then some minutes for questions. Once again, I remind you that this series is organized by our center at Penn. We are a specialized research center that seeks to enable organizations around the world to sustainably enact behavioral change. We do mainly consulting, research, and training. You have our link here for our website, and you can scan this QR code to follow us on Twitter. And as I always do, I wanted to just say a couple of things about one of the projects that we have done in the past. Today is very short. It's a study we did a couple of years ago in Mali for UNICEF and the Mali government about social norms around child marriage and child nutrition in two specific regions. You can find the report and more information in our website. Basically, we did some focus group and stakeholder engagement to create a social norms survey among 2,000 households or around 6,000 people. And we explored social norms and other factors around these two topics, which were meant to inform UNICEF strategy, communication strategy in the country. So you can go to our website and look for more information if you're interested. Here is the full list of our speakers. You can also find this online on nobectalks.com. Once again, you can scan this QR code to go to the full list and to register and so on. You will get reminders of all these. All our talks are uploaded in our website as well as videos. A few ground rules. If this is the first time you are joining, please remind to keep muted. If you can, please keep your camera on so that we have a more interactive experience. If you can, please change your username to reflect your affiliation to know where you're joining from. And for questions, you can ask them in the chat or with the raise hand function at the end. You can ask questions in the chat at any time. And we have a co-author here that will be helping answer and so on. We are also transmitting this live on Facebook. And as I mentioned, the recordings will be available in our page. Right, so we will now go with the video by today's early career researcher. Erika Kyrgios is a PhD student at the Wharton School here at Penn. She does research on gender and racial discrimination, prosocial behavior, and behavioral change. And the presentation is called When Women and Racial Minorities Seek Help, Mentioning Their Demographic Identity is an Asset. Once again, you can find her personal webpage here, and you can scan the QR code to go to that. So let me play the video. All right.
Hi, everyone. My name is Erika Kyrgios. I'm a fourth year PhD student in the LID department at Wharton, and I'm excited to share my research with you all today. To get us started, I want you to imagine that you open up your inbox, and at the top you see an email with the subject line seeking your feedback. And the email comes from a former student, Abigail Miller, and she writes, "Hi, Professor. I hope you're well. As a young person with dreams of a career in business academia, I'm writing to ask if you'd be willing to read over my personal statement for graduate school and share some feedback." Or maybe Abigail sends a slightly different email saying, "Hi, Professor. I hope you're well. As a young woman with dreams of a career in business academia, I'm writing to ask if you'd be willing to read over my personal statement for graduate school and share some feedback." So if you'll notice, these emails are identical, except that in the email in blue, Abigail refers to herself as a young woman rather than referring to herself as a young person. And in today's talk, we're going to explore the consequences of Abigail's choice in the email in blue, the consequences of explicitly mentioning one's underrepresented identity in a request for help. Prior research would suggest that Abigail's choice is going to hurt her. She's going to be less likely to receive the help that she seeks. And that's because several decades worth of audit studies have shown that subtle cues of demographic identity often lead to discrimination. So in other words, when people can infer your identity from, for example, a name or a photograph or an extracurricular activity, you're going to be more likely to be discriminated against if you're in a marginalized identity group. But what we're going to propose today is that reactions to explicit mentions of demographic identity will look very different than reactions to subtle cues of demographic identity. And in particular, we're going to suggest that Abigail's strategy is going to work. She's going to be more likely to receive help than if she hadn't mentioned her demographic identity. And we think this is the case because when you highlight your identity, you're not just making your identity salient, you're also making the potential for discrimination salient. And we know that people feel a strong motivation to control or avoid prejudice reactions. That's because it feels very aversive to think of yourself as sexist or racist. And indeed, prior research has documented that there are both internal motivations to control prejudice stemming from a desire to maintain a self-image as a non-prejudiced person, and external motivations that stem from the desire to escape social sanction and make sure others don't perceive you as being a prejudiced person. But either way, we think that mentioning demographic identity will trigger both these internal and external motivations to control prejudice and make people more willing to offer help to women and racial minorities. I'm going to show you one study, although we ran multiple in support of these hypotheses. And in this study, we had 2,476 white male city council members from the 777 largest cities in the US. They were participants in an audit study that was pre-registered on aspredicted.com. They received emails from students asking for career advice. Little did they know those emails were actually coming from us, and we randomly assigned them to one of four conditions in a 2x2 design. First, we randomly assigned them to either the minority help seeker condition, in which they received an email from a woman, a Black man or woman, or Latinx man or woman, or the white male help seeker condition. And as in prior audit studies, we manipulated identity by varying the name of the student requesting help. And we chose names that were pre-tested as strongly signaling a given gender and race. So for example, Todd Miller was a white male name and Darnell Washington, a Black male name. And we had 4 email accounts for each identity in order to stimulus sample. We also randomly assigned participants to either the identity mentioned condition or the identity not mentioned condition. And I'll show you what the language looks like in 2 slides. But essentially, people are doing what Abigail did. They're explicitly mentioning their demographic identity in the identity mentioned condition. And in the identity not mentioned condition, they're not. But importantly, there's always a subtle cue of demographic identity. The name is always in the email. This manipulation is just varying whether or not identity is highlighted on top of that subtle cue. Our pre-registered DD was whether or not politicians responded to the email within 1 week. And I'm going to read you an example of an email that a politician might have received in the identity mentioned condition. "Dear counselor, I imagine you get many more emails than you have time to answer, but I was hoping you might be willing to write back with a few words of wisdom for a young woman hoping to one day become a city councilor like you. I'm a student hoping to make a difference in my community through a career in Philadelphia local politics. Hope you're staying safe and well. Name." So for white male help seekers, there was virtually no effect of explicitly highlighting demographic identity. If anything, it was directionally negative. Minority help seekers received a response from the politicians about 30% of the time at baseline when they didn't mention their identity. But when they did mention their demographic identity, they received a response 38% of the time. And this was a significant increase. And in fact, when we ran our pre-registered regression, we found that there was a significant interaction between assignment to the minority help seeker condition and assignment to the identity mentioned condition. We found that there was a regression estimated 7.4 percentage point boost for minority help seekers when they explicitly mentioned their demographic identity. So I'm going to have to go through this quickly for the sake of time, but I wanted to show you what our results look like for each identity group in the study. So you're going to see response rates to people in that identity group in that condition relative to white men. And what you'll see is that for all identity groups, there was a directional boost to mentioning their demographic identity. So for no marginalized identity group members, did mentioning demographic identity hurt? But the size of the benefit varied. And this makes sense because when we're cutting down in this way, our sample size gets smaller, so we expect some noise. So what I've shown you today is that people are more willing to help women and racial minorities when they mention their demographic identity in help requests. And we replicate this effect in a second field experiment with about 1,100 participants and in a lab study with 1,500 participants. And though the study I showed you only had white male participants, these two experiments had people of all gender and racial groups, identities. We think this is a tool that women and racial minorities can use to improve their outcomes when they're seeking help. And we think optimistically, this is something that can inspire hopefully other interventions because it's shedding light on how people's desire to control prejudice can be harnessed for good and to hopefully create more egalitarian outcomes. Thank you all for listening, and thank you so much to my co-authors.
Great. So thank you so much to Erica for that great presentation. So Erica is here in the audience today. So if you have any questions or want to discuss anything, please use the chat. And now let's return. Yes, so once again, here you have the link to her webpage and the QR code. So just a small reminder before we go to the main talk, in 3 weeks' time, we will have our next talk. This time it will be Dr. Stefano Fiorin from Bocconi University speaking about from extreme to mainstream, the erosion of social norms. As always, same link, same time, same place on the 3rd June. Great. So let me introduce today's speaker. Dr. Chris Roth is an assistant professor at the Department of Economics of Warwick University in the UK, sorry. He is also an affiliate of CES Info Research Network in Munich, the Center for Economic Policy Research, and the Institute on Behavior and Inequality in Bonn. He received his PhD in economics from the University of Oxford, where he was awarded an Edgeworth Prize for Outstanding Doctoral Thesis. And he has also received a CES Info Distinguished Affiliate Award, a Reinhard Stelten Award from the German Economic Association, and a Young Economist Award from the European Economic Association. His research includes areas like psychology and economics, political economy, macro expectations, and he has published, among other journals, in the American Economic Review and the Journal of Public Economics. His work has been covered by the New York Times, the Washington Post, and the World Bank. As always, we will have Eugen Demand, one of our core members, as the moderator for the session. And as in previous occasions, we have one of Chris's co-authors in the audience to help answer any questions and comments you have in the chat during the talk. And then at the end, we will have the Q&A, as always. So yeah, thank you so much, Chris, for joining. And
yeah, well, thank you so much for having me. Thanks so much for this overly generous introduction. Also, thanks so much, Erica, for this super interesting and fascinating experiment that you presented. So yeah, thanks. I'm super excited to be here in this multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary, environment, and I'm looking forward to questions. And as was already mentioned, Ingar, my co-author, is in the audience and keen to take those questions. So today I will talk about disguising prejudice, popular rationales as excuses for intolerant expression. And just to already get that idea straight, so the point of this talk is to basically study a particular mechanism through which popular rationales shape the public expression of xenophobia and shape public expression, namely basically them popular rationales acting as excuses. So we're basically going to explore how social image concerns actually play a role and how rationales shape behavior through image concerns and not through more classic channels such as persuasion. And this is joint work with Leo Burstein, Ingar Harland, who's in the audience, and Akash Rao. Great. So, the core motivation basically for this paper and for this whole research program is that we want to understand why there's a rise in xenophobic expression and of hate speech. And what we've been observing of the Trump era, and now also in right-wing news media outlets, is that there is a lot of anti-immigrant rhetoric, in popular segments of the media. Even mass media outlets on the right basically embrace such rhetoric. And, we know from historical evidence that such rhetoric can have very adverse consequences. Such rhetoric has been shown, in the context of the Rwandan genocide to increase killings or to, ignite anti-Semitic violence. And so this paper is basically trying to understand why this rhetoric works. And so, usually studies that identify the effect of mass messaging on behavior presuppose that the core mechanism going on is persuasion. So basically, people hear a particular narrative about immigrants, information about immigrants, and then they change their behavior because they are persuaded. But what is actually, and many of you know this, it's certainly the case that, lab evidence from survey experiments suggests that the persuasion effects are actually fairly modest. So, if you look at studies and, and this is not accounting for publication bias, you will see that most studies looking at persuasion actually have fairly muted effects if you just look at the whole range of studies, and if you in particular zoom in on immigration-related topics. And also, one other reason why persuasion, is unlikely to explain the recent rise in xenophobic expression, up until, I guess, the most recent US election, is that actually, according to survey data, Democrats and Republicans reported feeling more warmly towards both legal and illegal immigrants in their private, basically in private surveys. So we basically propose an alternative mechanism, an additional mechanism on top of persuasion, to which the spread of anti-minority narratives might affect public behavior. And so the idea is that if narratives are widely known, and irrespective of whether they are true or false, if narratives are widely known, and I think that other people know about these narratives and think that I might plausibly believe in them, they will act as a cover. So if I now engage in xenophobic behavior, I can now basically use these anti-immigrant rationales as a cover to basically dilutes the signal. So it basically makes it less clear what my motive for this type of behavior was, and basically can shroud the kind of more stigmatized motives that I might be having. And so just a simple example to explain this intuition. So consider people who oppose immigration from Mexico because they dislike Mexicans, but yet they cannot express this opposition in a public setting without incurring social costs. It is stigmatized to basically express publicly, xenophobia. And but once an anti-Mexican rationale becomes widespread, these people are given an excuse. They can now claim that they do not like Mexican immigrants because they believe that Mexican immigrants commit more crime. And so basically the availability of the excuse opens up explanations other than intolerance for their Mexican position. So there's basically a stigmatized motive and a less stigmatized motive. And the rationale basically gives people plausible deniability. It makes the less stigmatized motive more likely. And so even if a rationale has no direct persuasive impact, it can serve as an excuse as long as it is plausible that others might be persuaded by the rationale. So if I think that, and as long as others think that I might have been persuaded by the rationale. So as long as, basically our design, will allow us to, ask the question whether in a world where people are privately, have the same information, whether this additional basically excuse mechanism explains some of this rise in xenophobic expression. And so just as a further, motivational fact, 62% of Americans and 77% of conservatives agree that the political climate these days prevents them from saying things they believe because others might find them offensive. So basically, there's a lot of people who don't, publicly express their opinions because they feel that they will be judged. And this, of course, suggests that excuses might potentially play an important role in enabling and facilitating public expression of otherwise stigmatized views. And so rationales may facilitate anti-minority expression by allowing people to couch their stigmatized beliefs in a socially acceptable manner. And so Paul Krugman basically made that point when writing for The Times last year, when he wrote that basically Trump provided affirmation and cover for racial hostility. So, the affirmation part, I guess, is what we would think of as, the persuasion. And, of course, also the changes in social norms that arise from that. And then the cover effect, the excuse effect, that's basically the effect that we'll look at today. And so we study popular rationales as excuses in a natural context, expression of xenophobic attitudes in the US. And so the very simple logic is people take the anti-immigrant action either because they are intolerant or because they are persuaded by the rationale. And so basically, if you think about that through the lens of a signaling model, intolerant, non-persuadable agents can pool with tolerant, persuadable agents to avoid the social stigma of being perceived as intolerant. And so what we do is we have basically 3 experiments. And the first experiment, we look at inference. So we basically look at how people are judged, what motives people think others had for donating, depending on whether they had an excuse for donating or not. So if people were given a rationale before donating to an anti-immigrant organization, will I change my beliefs? Will I hold different beliefs about why they donated? And so that's basically to set the stage that actually, rationales, popular rationales that others know about can basically shroud, they can basically act as a cover and shroud the actual motives. Experiments 2 and 3 are about xenophobic expression. So they're basically about asking whether people are more likely to make a public donation to an anti-immigrant cause or to make an anti-immigrant social media post when they have an excuse vis-a-vis the audience. I should say these experiments clearly have, pose important ethical questions, and we've thought a lot about the ethics of running experiments of this sort. I should say, of course, there are costs to running these experiments, and we basically, for example, made sure here that there would actually not be any anti-immigrant social media posts actually being posted. And I will go into the details of how we did that, but basically, our design was fairly constrained also by ethical considerations, which we try to balance, balance as well as possible. All right. So what is the main related literature? So basically, the main point of this paper is about social image concerns. And so basically, in a sense, we clearly relate to the literature on social image concerns. And we're looking at a new mechanism through which popular rationales affect xenophobic expression that operates through image. So if you think about it, there's a huge literature on the effects of information on behavior. And we are basically now isolating the social image mechanism in that context. And so the mechanism that we look at is how one's beliefs about how others will update about one's own motives, whether they matter, right? So if I know that others know that I had an excuse, I know that they will think differently about my motives, and that should affect the public expression of xenophobia. And so relating to the literature on media and propaganda, we provide evidence for basically a different new mechanism, namely that of higher order beliefs, that might matter in shifting behavior. And of course, we're looking at the literature we're looking at excuse effects. So we also relate to a literature on moral wiggle room. So the key difference here is that we are holding self-excuses completely constant. So this literature basically jointly identifies in some sense, is mostly concerned with self-excuses, depending on how you think about the role of the experimenter, you could also argue it identifies self and social excuses. And so we're basically looking at so excuses vis-a-vis an audience. So we're looking at commonly known rationales to lower stigma vis-a-vis an audience. So social excuses in some sense. All right. So this is basically the outline. I'll start with the interpretation of xenophobic expression, and then I'll go through xenophobic expression, with donations and social media, and then I'll have some discussion and applications, policy implications for debunking and things like that. Okay. So we ran a pre-registered experiment. It was registered on the AEA registry and conducted in February 2020. And because we wanted a sample of people that would actually find anti-immigrant donations, stigmatized, we focused our first experiment on inference on Democrats, which are representative of Democrats in the US. And so in this experiment, all participants are told about a recent study by Roth that finds that undocumented immigrants commit more crimes and more serious crimes than natives. I should say we debriefed all participants at the very end of the study, giving them a meta-analysis of the relationship between immigration and crime rates, which of course shows that there's no strong relation whatsoever. And if anything, immigration tends to decrease crime rates, right? So we gave people that debriefing at the end, just to preempt, any concerns about, this particular study. So basically everyone receives this piece of information about the Roth study. And then each respondent is matched with a previous survey participant who chose to authorize a $1 donation to fund The Wall, an anti-immigrant organization. And so we basically conducted a previous auxiliary experiment to avoid deception. So these other participants actually chose to authorize a $1 donation. So all of the instructions that we have here are truthful. And there are two conditions. And so this is the key treatment variation. In the excuse condition, respondents are told that your matched respondent was informed about Dr. Roth's study. And in the no excuse condition, your matched respondent was not informed about Dr. Roth's study. So the key thing is here, we're fixing beliefs about the Roth study among all respondents in the audience. And we're basically asking them, so we'll ask them some questions about their matched respondent. And then people in the excuse condition will be, told truthfully that their matched respondent was informed about Dr. Roth's study. People in the no excuse condition will be told that their matched respondent was not informed about the Dr. Roth study. So one of the matched respondent basically had an excuse in the excuse condition and didn't have an excuse in the no excuse condition. Of course, this is between design and so basically our model, which is the appendix of the paper, makes some simple predictions. Which is that, when matched with a respondent who was exposed to the rationale before deciding to donate, participants should update negatively about the respondent's intolerance and bias. So if I see someone who donated to fund The Wall and was exposed to the Dr. Roth rationale, I might think that he donated because, he had that rationale. He was persuaded by that rationale. He believed in that rationale. And then we also examine whether people update on a second type. And in this case, this is gullibility. So basically the idea is, well, if I think that the person donated because they were exposed to the rationale, I might now also think they're easily persuaded in general. So I might now update, whole different beliefs about the gullibility of the matched respondent. And so how do we measure that? So measuring inference, in some sense is tricky. And so what we're doing, because you basically don't wanna shift people's attention to a particular motive that the matched respondent could have had. And so what we're doing is actually a text analysis based measurement of basically the perceptions. So basically what we do is we immediately ask basically our respondents an open-ended question, namely, why do you think your matched respondent chose to donate to fund The Wall? And then we pre-specified two lists of words and the analysis code that we use. And the two lists of words are, about bias and gullibility. So we identified before we ran the experiment and based on some small pilots, basically words related to bias. So all thesaurus.com synonyms for the words race, racist, biased, xenophobic, intolerant, and prejudiced. And then similarly, 30 words related to gullibility. And then we basically stem these words, and basically, in the very, very basic exercise, we basically just look at, the fraction of respondents across conditions that mention any of these words. And as predicted by our model, basically respondents in the excuse condition whose matched respondent had an excuse, they are much more likely to mention words related to gullibility and much less likely to use words related to bias and racism. So this confirms the conjecture of our model that when someone is given a cover, then people hold different beliefs about the motives of the respondent. And after, okay, I see there's a slight mistake in the slides. So afterwards, there's a structured belief measure. So we tell our respondents, truthfully, that we administered one of two questionnaires to their matched respondent. One is the gullibility scale, which measures how easily people are manipulated by evidence from untrustworthy sources, and the other is the foreign cultural tolerance scale, which measures intolerance toward foreign values and traditions. And so we truthfully tell our respondents that if they correctly guess their matched respondent's score, they're entered into a lottery for $50 Amazon gift card. So we're basically giving people high stakes incentives to make a correct guess about their matched respondent's score on these scales. And basically the key finding here is that we replicate the results from this exercise using these structured measures. And I will skip that. I'll skip the details of the results for the sake of time. I should say you'll see a lot more details on how you can use this text data for inference purposes. So we basically also use simple machine learning techniques where we use the text in order to predict these predicted scores. And there's lots more stuff basically on there. I mean, we think that the text data here is very cool for inference purposes, because once you prime people on any particular scale, I think people's attention is captured into that dimension. So I think the key advantage here of this open-ended question is that it really gives you an unprompted spontaneous inference, which is what you want. You don't want to prime people on particular dimensions, and so this is I think what is nice about this measurement. All right, so what are potential concerns? So potential concerns are, there could be attrition. Well, we don't find any differential attrition between the excuse and the no excuse condition. And also none of the demographic variables differentially predict attrition. There could also be demand effects. We actually think the open-ended motive question is completely unprompted, so should be less prone to demand effects. We also asked our respondents what they thought the purpose of the study was, and let RAs hand code the responses. We applied also some new machine learning techniques in order to see whether these open-ended responses about the purpose of the study let us predict the treatment status of our respondents. So the idea is, if basically our treatment systematically induce demand effects, then people might talk about different things when they are asked about the purpose of the study, and then we could basically use that information in order to classify basically people in their treatment status. And we basically don't find that the machine learning classifier manages to classify people. I should say we do manage to classify people based, so it's not a general inability of ours to use machine learning. So we have some evidence, in the other experiment, from one irrelevant treatment, that we can actually use this technique in order to predict treatment status if people talk about different topics in these purpose questions. So basically, we find no evidence really that demand effects matter. I mean, of course, this is not conclusive evidence as usual with demand effects, but it's reassuring. Okay. So what's the summary of the first experiment? When judging others' motives, people believe that those who donated with an excuse are more gullible and less biased than those who donated without an excuse. And we also have additional revealed preference evidence that people dislike the intolerant more than they dislike the gullible. So you might, it could be that, in some sense, our paper and the premise, of the signaling story hinges on the fact that People dislike being seen as intolerant more than being seen as gullible. And so, basically this we have additional review preference evidence with a dictator game, where we show that people are less likely to donate to someone with a high intolerance score compared to a donation to someone with a high score on the gullibility scale. All right. So this basically motivates the question whether people strategically use rationales to disguise their bias. So is people's public expression of xenophobia facilitated by rationales? And this is what we're getting at in experiment 2. So I should say experiment 2 closely maps to experiment 1, and then experiment 3 and is a bit more stylized, and experiment 3 is a bit more fieldy. Okay, so we also had a pre-registered experiment, and it was conducted in January 2020, all before COVID. And here we're working with a sample of respondents that are in principle open to, anti-immigrant rhetoric and so on. So we're focusing on a sample of Republicans and independents through online survey providers. And we also replicated our experiment with a leaner set of instructions in October 2020 during the pandemic. We'll find exactly the same, results. So it's reassuring. And I will present to you the leaner set of instructions just also for the sake of exposition. And so participants are told that we are conducting a study about political attitudes in their local area. And the main experiment has 3 conditions. So we have an excuse condition, a no excuse condition, and a control condition. And so respondents in the excuse and the no excuse conditions are, told about Dr. Lutz's study, with the identical wording as in experiment 1. So everything here is basically, as parallel as possible. And then people in the control group do not learn about Dr. Lutz's study. And all respondents are given an opportunity to authorize a $1 donation to fund the wall, and told that their decision will be posted on our website. So I should say we provide our respondents with more details on the website and how the website is basically promoted and will be, made available. Basically made, how publicity for this website will be made to, make it plausible that people might actually, look up this website. And then basically the key difference between respondents in the excuse condition and the no excuse condition is that basically people in the excuse condition will be told that people who visit the website will know that all participants to the study were shown the preliminary findings from Dr. Lott's study before deciding whether or not to donate to fund the wall. So basically, the people who will come to the website will know that the respondents from the experiment, that they were exposed to the Lott study. For the no excuse condition, on the other hand, the website will state that all participants were surveyed before Dr. Lott's study was published in an academic journal. And so basically, we're using the fact here, so this instruction is truthful, but it's truthful, but it is misleading in the sense that, it's true that Dr. Lott's study is not published in an academic journal, was not published in an academic journal at the time. But of course, this wording suggests that respondents were not exposed to the study at all. So basically, people in the no excuse condition will think that the website visitors will think that they were not exposed to the Lott study. So in one condition, basically, people think that the audience thinks that they had an excuse. In the other condition, people think that the audience thinks that they did not have an excuse. And so, this is a fairly complex design. Basically, what this design accomplishes, though, is it holds constant first-order beliefs and second-order beliefs, and identifies this excuse effect through these third-order beliefs. And I will show you a much more intuitive manipulation of third-order beliefs in the third experiment. So this is, as you can see, a very explicit manipulation. But it's important for us because we can basically thereby separate it, our story about the excuse effect from stories about persuasion, first-order beliefs, and the audience being persuaded by and thereby the judgment being affected. Okay, and then our respondents are just asked whether they would like to donate to fund the wall. Yes, no, and so basically, just to be very clear. So the comparison between the control group and the no excuse condition identifies the combined effects of persuasion and expected persuasion of others. So remember, people in the control group do not learn about the lot study, whereas people in the no excuse condition, they learn about the lot study and they think that their audience learns about the lot study. And so, I learned about the lot study, which may have privately persuaded me, and I know my audience will learn about the lot study, which may privately persuade them. And make them approve of my donation more, right? Because they've been persuaded. And the no excuse versus the excuse condition identifies, the effect of excuses. I should be more likely to donate an excuse because I believe my audience will update about my persuadability rather than my bias. So my audience will think that I'm gullible, or that I had a reason to donate, that there was, that I was exposed to a rationale that, I could have found plausible. And they basically will be less likely to think that I'm biased. Okay, so what do we find? So we basically do find a significant excuse effect. So basically, the audience thinking that I had an excuse, me thinking that the audience thinks that I had an excuse, basically significantly increases donations. But there's no effects, basically no differences between the control condition and the no excuse condition. Okay, so of course, in some sense, it is surprising that how can it be that there's no effects of first order beliefs and second order beliefs, and only an effect of third order beliefs. So, and this comes back to our story. People might actually not be persuaded by information, but they might think that it's plausible that others might think that I might have been persuaded by the information. So it could be that people just overestimate the extent to which information is persuasive and overestimate the extent to which others think that the information is persuasive. And if you think about it, our inference experiment did show that the excuse changed inference. Okay. Good. So, what are potential concerns here? Well, again, there could be differential attrition, especially because, we're posting these donation decisions on the website and so on. So basically, we don't find any differential attrition. As before, there's no heterogeneity by demographics in the extent to which there is attrition. And so we also had a finding, which I skipped for the sake of brevity, that our effects were actually driven by respondents from counties with more basically Democratic voters and more independent voters and less Republican voters. So if you live in a place where people are more judgmental of xenophobia, this is when the excuse was really hitting home, right? And given that we basically now instructions made it clear that the website would be locally promoted, which it was, through ads and so on. Then basically, this is when we see, the effects being stronger. So basically, if you're a Republican and you live in a more democratic area, this is basically when the excuse effect is strongest, consistent with the idea that, punishment, social costs are highest in areas where, people dislike anti-immigrant expression. We also asked respondents what they thought the purpose of the study was. Again, let RAs hand code the responses and find small and mostly insignificant differences between the excuse and the no excuse condition. Less than 1% of our respondents guessed the true purpose of the study. Most of them thought that the purpose of the study was just to understand persuasion and so on. And then again, we use this machine learning, technology and methodology to think about demand effects. And so our classifier, interestingly, manages to predict whether you were in the control condition as opposed to the excuse or the no excuse condition, but it does not affect, it does no better than chance to predict whether people were in the excuse or no excuse condition. So for our key comparison, people don't hold different beliefs about the purpose of the study. Whereas, then basically the demand effect is more obvious when it comes down to comparing people who were exposed to like the lot study or not the lot study. Which makes sense given that, that the difference between the excuse and no excuse manipulation is much more subtle, just a few words compared to, the control group, which was not exposed, to this study at all. All right. So what did we find here? We found that participants are more willing to engage in a public anti-immigrant action when they have an excuse. This effect is quantitatively important compared to the effects of persuasion and beliefs. And, this gives us revealed preference evidence that senders expect to be judged less harshly for being persuadable than for being biased. I should flag, of course, this evidence is stylized, and it's not, I guess it doesn't reflect to a full extent, the natural settings in which people usually, express xenophobia. And so we have a third experiment, which is on xenophobic expression on social media. And obviously the motivation for this is that, a lot of anti-immigrant expression and, xenophobia in general often takes place on social media. And that's a setting with a natural audience, connected acquaintances, friends, and followers, and readily available rationales. News anchors posting videos, persuasive videos, politicians posting, rationales, spreading narratives. And so we basically ask how relevant excuses are in shaping expression in this setting. And we will use a much more subtle manipulation of the treatment, which I will show it to you in a second. And so this is an experiment we actually ran 2 months ago. And so we recruit a sample of Republicans and independents with Twitter accounts through an online survey provider. And you will see the sample size is much smaller. And that has a reason, due to logistics, which I will explain in a second. And so basically we have, again, two conditions, excuse and no excuse conditions. And all participants watch a video featuring Fox News anchor Tucker Carlson discussing the link between illegal immigration and crime. As before, we will do the debunking, the debunking to make sure that, we're not misinforming respondents. And participants then decide whether or not to privately join a campaign to immediately deport all illegal Mexican immigrants. And those who join are given the opportunity to post a tweet with a petition to immediately deport all illegal immigrants. So one thing that you will see from this design immediately is that we're now working with a sample of people who basically, privately hold xenophobic views, and then we're basically then studying how willing they express this private view depending on the exact wording of the tweet. So basically the tweet will just be different in one single word, which will change whether respondents had an excuse or not. And this will allow us to see whether excuses play a role in this setting. But power in this setting will be much higher for us because we now know people's private views through this first step in the design. And so, of course, there's a big ethical question here, and a question that surrounds ethics, both surrounding deception and basically not generating any harm to public and creating any negative externalities as researchers. And so, of course, we want to reveal preference measure of the willingness to publicly express anti-immigrant sentiment, but we don't actually want participants to post on Twitter. So rather than asking participants to post, we ask them to schedule a post using a Tweetability, which is an app that we actually created. So we built an app that allows us to schedule, to basically tweet on our respondents' behalf if our respondents agree, to basically join in. And so this is the reason why we only recruited a smaller number of respondents, because it was not as easy to recruit large amounts of respondents who had both a Twitter account and were comfortable basically giving us, rights to tweet on their behalf. And so participants are truthfully told that tweets will be posted when and if we reach survey respondents in all counties. But participants are also told that all tweets will be deleted by August 1st. Since we recruit fewer respondents in the number of counties, of course, the post will never be made public. So again, we don't lie to people explicitly, but of course, our instructions are misleading. And, I would call this like a case of borderline deception. which, we were trading off, would we post this content or would we, engage in borderline deception, in this wording? And, we felt like this was the best solution, from this kind of trade-off. Yeah. Okay. So coming back to the design. So our respondents are basically exposed to this short video where Fox News host Tucker Carlson presents evidence on whether illegal immigrants commit more crime. And then afterwards, basically, some respondents receive the link. So all respondents see this video. And then some respondents get the link to the video before they decide whether to join this campaign. And other respondents actually are first, in the no excuse condition, are first asked whether they want to join this campaign, and then they get this link. This, there's no difference in people's inclination to sign up across these two conditions. Well, I guess everyone already watched this, few minutes video about Carlson. And so this basically allows us to then, use wording in the tweet, which basically gives people in the excuse condition, an excuse because they received the link to the study before joining the campaign, whereas, people in the no excuse condition get the link to the study after joining the campaign. And so just to be very clear, this is the tweet that our respondents are shown that they authorize us to tweet. In the excuse group, it says, I've joined a campaign to immediately deport all illegal Mexicans. Before I joined the campaign, I received a link to this video about how illegals commit more crime. Sign this petition to immediately deport all illegal Mexicans. So here we use the word, before I joined this campaign, I received a link. In the no excuse condition, everything is identical, except for one word, namely here, the word after. After I joined the campaign, I received a link to this video. And this is, of course, truthful. As I showed to you, some people received the link to the video beforehand, other people received it afterwards. Though, of course, everyone had watched the video. So we can, again, hold beliefs fixed about, first-order beliefs fixed and second-order beliefs fixed, but we vary whether the audience thinks that respondents had, seen the video before joining the campaign or after joining the campaign. So this allows us to clearly identify third-order beliefs with a much, much more subtle manipulation, just one word, and not an explicit manipulation. Yeah. So you might now think that, well, maybe this affects people's beliefs about how persuasive these tweets are in persuading other respondents. We basically ran another experiment to show that there's no difference. So if you expose people to this tweet or this tweet, and then ask them to join the campaign afterwards, it doesn't make any difference. So it's not that these messages are differentially, persuasive in persuading others. So that it's not that people's persuasion motives could be driving any differences that are here. But so anyway, so what we find is that there's a big excuse effect. People in the excuse condition basically are 17 percentage points more likely to tweet, to schedule the tweet compared to people in the no excuse condition. So basically this one word difference, which gives people in the excuse condition an excuse, makes a big difference. All right. So I guess, we hope that this convinces you that rationales play an important role also in the real world, in natural settings. And so basically what did we learn here? So, we argue that this is a paper that allows you to get a better understanding of the mechanism through which narratives basically work. So here we argue that one mechanism through which narratives work is that they actually affect, the image consequences of xenophobic expression or, any kind of public expression. Needn't be, our paper had the application of xenophobia, but it could be about all sorts of stigmatized behaviors that incur social costs. And so in the first part of the paper, we showed that when judging others' motives, people believe that individuals who engaged in public intolerant actions after being exposed to a rationale are less biased and more persuadable than individuals not exposed. So rationales, basically successfully, change the inference that people make, about the motives for engaging in particular behaviors. And then the second and third experiment basically show that rationales affect the public expression via the provision of an excuse. So plausible justifications for stigmatized action can increase the willingness to engage in that action, even in the absence of persuasion. And so this mechanism may inform our understanding of a variety of different, political economy phenomena. So let's just go into one particular one, the debunking of fake news. So you might think that, that basically posting fake news is stigmatized, and can we leverage this? Can we leverage this mechanism that we basically describe in this paper? Basically to make debunking more effective. So basically, usually what I guess Twitter and Facebook and so on do is that they debunk people privately. They tell people that a given message was fake news. But instead, it could be also useful to generate common knowledge that a given justification is invalid. And Facebook has, and then I guess Twitter during the election has experimented with various strategies, to curtail the spread of misinformation. And of course, our findings suggest that debunking is more effective if it is common knowledge that all users have been debunked before posting fake news. So if everyone knows that everyone is warned, before making a fake news post, then you basically get rid of the plausible deniability. You know that people posted a particular type of content, even though they knew that it was fake. And so we think that is one, one application where, where this mechanism is relatively useful, and yeah, will be really interesting to explore this mechanism in such a field setting. Fantastic. I think I don't know how I'm doing in terms of time, but that's it from my end.
Great, Chris. Thanks so much. You're perfectly on time. So let's just, maybe you want to share your screen again, just so that we have the slides if people have questions about that. I see Christina raises her hand, so maybe Christina, if you want to go first, go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you for the very interesting talk and paper. I wanted to ask, in the first experiment, for example, did people know that they were all Democrats, that you were, that you take as respondent? And do they know that the match respondent is a Democrat?
Okay, so we did not. Okay, those are great questions, and those are things that exactly. So those are great questions, and those are just details that were very clear in the instructions that I just basically now didn't really touch upon. So basically, our respondents were not told. They were not told anything about. So basically, our respondents in the first experiment themselves were Democrats, but they received no information whatsoever about the political affiliation of their matched respondent, other than the fact the only pieces of information they received was that they donated to fund the wall and whether they had been exposed to the Lot study before or after donating. And of course, if you fixed beliefs about their political affiliation, that might change inference, right? In some sense, you could think that the less information we give to people, the more inference people might make about the motives, because I guess there's just less information out there. So, if you don't know people's political affiliation, there might be more scope to update. So it is possible that the updating that we saw would be weaker if we had fixed beliefs about the political affiliation of a given person. Yeah, so it's a terrific question.
Well, let me add something. I think you would get a higher level of basically acceptability and rationalization if the respondent, I am a Democrat, I know the respondent is a Democrat.
Mm.
So there would be more, the respondent is a Democrat, he's really gullible.
Mm. Very interesting point, right? So it could be
a sort of a higher level of gullibility excuse if it's an in-group, basically, with Democrats, of course. With Republicans, it's a different story. But I was very interested, if you want to look at that, it would be super gullibility if it's another Democrat, be much higher.
So that's very interesting. So you're basically saying, I mean, there could be some group identity story going on, right? So if you basically make different inference about other people's motives depending on whether they're a group member or not, right? So you want to hold nice beliefs about your group and kind of want your kind of, exactly. So you want your group identity, you want to protect your kind of the belief utility that you get from basically your group identity. And so exactly. Oh yeah, that's a very interesting idea. That's a very good point. No, that's cool. That's cool. Awesome. Thanks so much for that. And I should say, so you also raised another very good point, which was about the and I didn't make that clear in the talk, so I should clarify it. So basically, in the expression experiment, we did tell our respondents that the website. So we told them basically that the audience would be mixed, that it would be, basically that, we would try to promote it with both Republicans and liberals. So basically a mixed audience. So basically in the expression experiment, we basically wanted to make sure that they also thought that there could be Democrats going there, and not only Republicans. So
That's good. Okay, thank you.
Chris, let me interject with an own question about your Twitter experiment. So what I wonder is social image concerns will matter quite a bit there, right? So you were asked to publish this tweet, and so now is your DV, do you only have their intention to tweet publicly, or do you know something also about just their intention that they would like to support that if it was anonymous, let's say, right? So are you only capturing the outcome, or do you also have any indication of the intentions?
So we know that everyone, exactly. So we know that everyone privately supports. Everyone said, yes, I would like to join this campaign. So we know, and this is why I think we have this could also explain where we have a bigger effect size here, because, in the other experiment, maybe 50% of the people didn't even privately support the cause, right? So, I mean, then, it's going to be much more hard, from a power perspective to detect effects. Here, we know our experiment is only about the subset of respondents who click yes here. And, it's the same across these two groups. And we do, all sorts of bounding, it's a very, very small difference. And we do all sorts of bounding things you can imagine, like it doesn't make a difference. Basically, so we do have a little bit of information, about these Twitter profiles in principle. So we can scrape, content and so on from that, but we're not really super powered for heterogeneous treatment effects here, right? So because we have a relatively small sample, especially compared to the mains, to the first two experiments. So I think I'm probably a bit skeptical whether we could do much more here. But so what is interesting is that a lot of people, when we asked them later on what they thought about the study and so on, it seems that really people believed that their tweet would be scheduled and would be posted, because people talked about that, that it would be, good that this message would be spread and so on. Or some people said, oh yeah, my followers will be fine with it. And so you basically, people seem to have believed, in our tweetability app. And it is a real app, it works, right? We just didn't schedule, we could technically schedule these tweets. It's just that we basically, wanted to avoid that for ethical reasons, right? But it seems like it's not that people just didn't believe that we would actually tweet it, and that's why they just all said yes.
So that speaks to the point, right? I was just basically saying you capture lower bounds, because the point of you saying yes, you think it will be posted publicly, right? You're not really capturing whether people would anonymously sign a petition or something, right? So you're really just capturing the extreme people in that way.
Yeah, exactly, for sure. We would argue that, it's much more costly to tweet something like that publicly than to do it privately in some sense. So we would, but then again, signing petitions is also costly, right? So I don't know. This is a different cost margin, right? A hassle cost of having to register with your email and so on. But you're right. We are basically going out. I mean, and, in some sense, you can think of this paper, as being relevant, particularly for fringe movements. When you think about the from extreme to mainstream paper by Leo, that's about, popularizing, changing social norms and so on. I mean, here we're looking at people with extreme views. And we argue that this mechanism, is particularly relevant for these kind of extreme groups that hold very extreme views, and that they use these rationales to kind of make these, they basically have their views, even though they are quite stigmatized.
Yeah. So second thing, which I think comes out of the implication that you just mentioned for like Twitter and debunking news. So Twitter had this nudge, at some point where they would like ask you a second time, do you really want to retweet that since you haven't read that? But if you click yes, it's not publicly displayed. So this could be a great experiment where you would have a little badge that every time you retweet something that you didn't actually read, right? So that would be attached to that. I think this is like a direct test of this implication, which is, would I treat that retweet differently if I know that you actively decided not to inform yourself, right? And I think what this connects very well to is maybe sort of the econ literature on intention-based like motives, right? There's like an intention of you of like retweeting crazy stuff that you don't even read. Like it's just about spreading the news. So that would be a great thing to sort of test, which I'm sure.
Leo has been talking to Twitter about exactly things like that. So, we don't know whether and how these things will progress, but so exactly. So
that's great. So I see. So Gianluca posted a question. Maybe because it's a longer one, I'll let Gianluca maybe ask it, and then we have Lucas with the subsequent question. Gianluca, do you want to unmute yourself and then?
Yes, thank you, Chris, for the great work. Picking up on what Christina was saying. So I was wondering whether, knowing that you are faced by people of your same political affiliation, so suppose that you're Republican and that your audience is made up by Republicans, then you might have a kind of a perverse motivation to actually showing to others that you are willingly committing antisocial actions because that will gain you reputation. So, for instance, you could think of spreading fake news, knowing that the news you are spreading are fake, as long as others also know that the news are fake, precisely because this antisocial behavior will gain you reputation in front of people of the same political affiliation as you.
Totally. I mean, I agree. I mean, and that has important implications for echo chambers, right? So if we think that most, audiences are super homogeneous, then I mean, so basically, I agree with you. I mean, the composition of the audience will matter greatly for the signaling implications. And, I mean, in some sense, you could argue that, that image concerns might have implications for the extent of polarization of views, as a result of this. But I guess the stigma is fairly complex. And so it seems that even this extreme, even this extreme, set of people, that we are looking at here, who basically say they would like to join a campaign to immediately deport all illegal Mexican immigrants, they still seem to need an excuse. But I agree, it would be fascinating to just, I guess, manipulate beliefs about the audience. I mean, one thing we had been talking about, which would be feasible in principle, that people might hold misperceptions about who their audience is on Twitter, right? So you could easily, basically, if we actually analyzed, the slant of the followers that people have on Twitter, and you measured beliefs about those, you could actually, with this kind of, with truthful information about the real world audience, shift beliefs about who the audience is. I mean, that could be an interesting way to kind of test that test things like that in this type of natural setting. But I mean, I agree with you. It's the audience composition matters a lot, and we think a lot more needs to be done there.
There's like, even to that point, there's like out of Oxford, there's like a new tool that was published on Twitter where you can put in your Twitter handle and it would analyze what kind of information you're sharing and whether that's like fake news or like very right, very left. So you can get feedback on your own behavior that way too, right? So there's a lot of cool stuff that you can do.
Yeah, that's true. Actually, I mean, this was all over Twitter recently, right? That,
yeah.
I mean, I was told who my top, I guess, who my top followers are and what their slant is, basically, and so on. And then, you know,
so there's like there's an even more recent one where you get to analyze yourself, right? So now you get feedback on your behavior. So I did that. It just tells me I just retweet like, you know, left-leaning type of sources that are trustworthy, but you can also get the opposite stuff, right? So yeah. Lucas, you have a question. Go ahead.
Yeah, actually, I have the same point as Gianluca, so I'm fine.
All right. Any additional questions?
Maybe could you comment something on the effect size, because you mainly showed significance, but can you tell us more about how big this treatment effect is in terms of shifting?
So on Twitter, basically what we had was in the control group or in the no excuse group, we had 48. I mean, so basically out of those people holding privately this quite strong view, 48% in the no excuse condition were willing to post it, which is high. I mean, which shows you, I mean, we're getting like kind of extreme people. And yeah, the effect size here is relatively large, right? So, I mean, we're increasing it basically by about 17 percentage points. So, you know, that's about 0.35 of a standard deviation with kind of binary with that kind of control mean, right? So that's a big effect size. The effect size in the other experiment was more muted. And, you know, so here we're looking at an effect size of about, 7 percentage points, you know, compared to that control mean. That's about half of the effect size in terms of, you know, z-scores. And well, there are many reasons why that could be the case, but the main one is that, you know, among those people in the sample, I mean, you know, we did not elicit any private opinions in the survey. We went for a full between design in some sense, which, you know, has some advantages. And so basically it could be that, you know, 50% of the people in here were just not even privately supporting, you know, the fund the wall and you know, so. I mean, we didn't want to elicit the donation decision twice or something like that, or we didn't want people to commit to their, you know, to their preference, in the survey. So basically we have one design, which is a complete between design, where we basically know less about the type heterogeneity. And then the second experiment, we know quite a bit about the private preference, but then we have this Twitter tool to see whether they're willing to kind of share this private thing. And that, I think, is the main reason. I mean, it could also just be that they care more about the Twitter audience than they care about the audience on this website and so on. They might have found that more believable and so on, right? So basically, I think there are many. I mean, we won't be able to fully explain them, but, you know, this is a quite sizable, you know, effect. So, yeah.
Great. So we are very timely then. If there are no other questions, Chris, this was amazing as expected. Thanks so much for presenting this work. Thanks for Ingar of mostly answering my questions really in the chat. See you in 3 weeks. And Chris, if you want to stick around, we'll discuss the next steps in your meetings one-on-one. So thanks everybody, and yeah, see you in 3 weeks.